EDClass Limited. Breaking barriers to learning.
Hello and welcome back to EDClass's podcast. Today we are joined by Shaheen Myers. Shaheen is a keynote speaker, leadership coach and former Deputy Director for Learning at Leeds City Council. Today we'll be discussing building connections and improving well-being for teachers, which can then benefit students and their educational experiences. Okay, so firstly, Shaheen, thank you for coming on. Can you tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do just to start off?
Hi, and hi, Tom. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I'm Shaheen Myers. I'm the founder of a company called Balanced, and I set that up last August after my role as Deputy Director of Education for Leeds City Council. And it's in response really to sort of several things, but the main mission of it is to support leaders to stay in education, support the workforce who work relentlessly really, to support, engage, and to give back in a way which is quite difficult and challenging at the moment. It has been for a while, but particularly at the moment where we've got lots of uncertainty. And so it's to stem the recruitment and retention crisis. It's to look at how culture and care and well-being is prioritised, and how we are, as an organisation, how we as educationalists support ourselves in order to support our children, so that they benefit from the work, reflection, awareness that we build into ourselves, ultimately. And so I've been around in education now for over 20 years. I have worked in mainstream and academy trusts, trained quite a number of staff and been a head teacher and executive leader before I took on my role as a director of education. So that's kind of my background, but Balanced is really in response to my own personal loss with my husband, who was a phenomenal teacher, and in response obviously to Ruth Perry, who we lost in education, who just by doing the thing that she loved the most. And so we've got to think differently. We've got to think about how we are helping our leaders to lead and our teachers to teach, and how we can remove some of those external pressures and demands that have mainly meant that people have lost their efficacy within the sector. And I suppose it's saying that it's readdressing the power imbalance, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I say that's amazing what you're doing at the moment. I mean, I think we kind of forget that teachers themselves are actually humans themselves, and they've got their own thoughts, feelings, and their own stresses and everything that come along with it. And teachers now are expected to be, HR professionals. Got to learn about medical care, etc., and loads of different aspects and special educational needs, that kind of thing. So I think what you're doing, to help and promote that, promote that well-being aspect is just so important. Just talk to me about how important well-being is in education, and especially for teachers. How crucial is it that we get that fundamental factor right? We talk a lot about attendance, attainment, and behaviour for students, and then how do we actually focus on actually teachers first, so then they can actually improve, student outcomes as well.
Absolutely. I think it comes from the word of well-being and what we mean by well-being. So what we've done is we sort of think mental health and well-being go hand in hand. And I think you touched on this previously, to say that we have to be the font of our knowledge and wear many hats. And therefore we need to know what it means to be to have sort of issues and challenges that we're facing if we're mentally unwell, but also what does that mean in terms of sort of well-being? Are they both linked together, or are they extractable? And when you think about well-being, we've got a sort of a little bit of confusion around that. So for me, well-being is about the culture of the organisation. Is how do people feel well? How do we elevate positive states of being? And what the tangible and the tactical that we have. That doesn't mean that the responsibility of well-being is left to the mental health lead. And we've seen its DFE guidance around training mental health well-being leads across education. And this is fundamentally about how do we raise positive states of being well. And that really is tangible and tactical, because you're looking at your current structures in school in order to do that. And so we know by virtue of connection we have those daily interactions, whether those interactions are intentional or not intentional. Those daily interactions, if we are consciously and intentionally aware of those, and we hold those in a way that's equitable, fair, and creates a sense of belonging, we're all automatically going to elevate positive states of being. And I talk a lot about sort of the cancers of the mind and how complaining, criticizing, and comparing are emotional contagion. So it's exactly the same as COVID. It's an emotional contagion, and it spreads like wildfire. So it spreads and drips onto children, it spreads and drips onto colleagues, etc. And it's felt, seen, and heard. And that can last in the body for a long time. Your feelings of frustration due to comparing, criticizing, and complaining last in the body for hours at a time. And when we look at the frustration of leaders who are having to be accessible and everything to everyone and little to themselves, they don't have the time to think or the time to stop or the time to reset. And therefore, the body keeps a score. So you have different manifestations, which often can be work-related stress, work-related absences, sleep challenges and issues. And I often ask leaders, what's the one thing that keeps you awake at night? And that's when you have a barrage of things that come out and overflow. And so what we're trying to do is say, this is not about you creating a wellbeing framework, a wellbeing policy, wellbeing staff meetings, it's not about doing that. It's about coming back to your vision, values, your mission. Where in that do we create a strong sense of belonging and elevate the positive states of being? For us, what's that experience in our school, for our staff and our children? What is the offer that we can give to elevate that? So it is, in a way, happy staff and children friendly schools, so to speak. That's what they are. But how do we create those? I mean, also, how do we call out when we see and hear practice that doesn't align with that? And so it's coming back to what we know best, not doing more, not doing any add-ons, but using what we know as an existing structure and using that as a platform to create some very deep connections. And when you strengthen the bonds and we know what belonging looks and feels like, if we spend some dedicated time on that, that's where we're going to make a tangible difference.
100%, yeah. I think what you're saying about the deep connections, that's a fundamental factor. Building trust and rapport with everyone involved in the education sector, just make sure everyone's working in unison, right? Just so we're all on the same page, because at the ultimate end of the day, everyone's got the ultimate goal of supporting children, but you need to support your teachers as well. So, in terms of that, working in unison. And obviously, you've been to the conference, the AP conference. It's amazing. Thank you for being part of that. You've saved my neck many times on that. But in terms of, did you go see Shazad's piece on internal AP?
No, I wasn't able to. No.
So yeah, he talks about talking about having a close knit team. That being able to do that, everyone on the same page. It's how that transfers into a successful team, then goes on to the children as well. So that's how important it is, but it's also important to talk about embracing individuality and everyone's their own person. And I know you talk a lot about that as well. How important it is, that we tell teachers to ensure that, they are not on their own, but embrace themselves so they can, transfer that onto the children. They've got their own beliefs, and that eventually that will help build connections in themselves and also the children and their confidence. How important is all that?
Oh, absolutely. It's fundamental, really. I often ask a question, do you know the prevalence of loneliness in your organisation? Do you know the prevalence of loneliness? And that question does not tend to appear on staff surveys, nor does it tend to appear on pupil surveys. And so what we have often is a superficial layer of what we already know when we do these surveys, but what we're actually trying to find out. So when we step back and think, what is it that we're trying to find out here? If we're trying to find out how strong our sense of belonging is, and the questions we need to ask are, do our staff and our children have to shed layers of their identity on their way to school or the workplace? And if the answer is yes, they do, because by virtue of how they speak, how they act, what they wear, what they watch, their sort of cultural capital, as we call it, if those things are barriers to inclusion, then what are we doing to actively remove those? And so the question I've always asked, particularly sort of in my work, throughout the years in education, it's who does this include and who does this exclude, all the way from letters to policy. Who does this include and who does it exclude? If we're trying to create a strong sense of belonging, we need to ask ourselves the questions where we can reveal our blind spots. And prospective blindness is a killer in any organisation, a cultural killer. And so what we're looking at here is around our table, if we do not promote and have the diversity of thought there, then what we're doing is we're feeling like we have like-mindedness, like-minded decision-making, like-minded solution finding, and therefore by virtue of that, we exclude so many. And so the strong sense of belonging for me, I always say this, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, because I'm not meaning you don't have a policy, but if your sense of belonging is so strong, you do not need an attendance policy or behaviour policy. You're not having to rely on those policies because your sense of belonging is so strong. What you want your people to say is, I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel valued. What you want your staff to say is exactly the same. And I often say this in my keynotes as well. Psychological safety is not in the absence of threat, but it's in the presence of connection. And it's in that presence of connection that we have in our minds and within our structure and within our how we embody that is so strong that we do not move away from that. We know what it looks like because we spent time on it. We looked at the formulation of it. For our trust and for our school, belonging means this to us and our community. And this is how we transfer that into our DNA as such. And so, yes, it's extremely linked. If Shazad was talking about how a team cohesively work together on the same page, absolutely, it will transfer to the children. Of course, it will. And I'd go back to that sense of loneliness. We know there are a number of staff who come to school, that come to organisations, and have little adult interaction and then go home. And so do we know that if we're trying to create deep connection, then we need to know how our staff feel in a way that reveals those hidden blind spots and doesn't tell us what we already know.
Exactly, yeah. I love that, what you're saying, presence of connection. You know, it's important to have that sense of feeling welcomed and valued, especially for staff as well. You know, if people are welcome, they're going to be more inclined to have that sense of belonging and want to come to work and impart their best knowledge and confidence in these children as well. Now, I know you touched on connectedness there. Can you just talk a bit more about that? And then what strategies would you suggest to motivate? What specific strategies do you suggest in your keynotes and your speeches to the people out there?
So there's quite a number of things really that I do when I work with trusts and with schools. Ultimately, I work with leaders first, and we sort of look at, and I smile when I say this, I ask very deep, thought-provoking questions like, who are you beneath your role? Or who are you beneath your role? What brings you the most joy within your work? And can you tell me the percentage that you have that dedicated to that? So you start off by asking some sort of deep questions to really get a sense of who they are. They also ask a question around story of origin. So tell me what it's taking you to get from there to where you are now. And it's a very powerful question. Another question is, what do most people not know about you? And what I'm doing is I'm building a 3D. I'm building a 3D understanding of who the person is. In front of me is human-centered leadership. And you mentioned it very, very, very early on, is we are humans first. And what we tend to forget, I did a staff meeting recently and asked teachers I went too far with this actually, and it's quite sad, but I asked them to write down 3 things they appreciated about themselves, and they found it very difficult. So I had to draw it down to 1 thing that they appreciate about themselves. These are fantastic, fantastic teachers who are doing an exceptional job, given the circumstances that they're in, and they were not able to actually jot down 3 things they appreciate about themselves. And they could roll off titles to me, you know, mom, or I'm husband, or I'm a leader, I'm deputy head, I'm assistant principal, so on and so forth. But what they're not able to tell me is who they are. So who they are is who you bring to your role. And so what I do is I work on cohesiveness in teams. I work on transforming meetings in teams so that we have what is called generative attention and generative listening. And that is how we create strong sense of belonging and ease. It's about giving somebody the equality to say, you are equal to me in thinking terms, and this is how we're going to create environment to do that. So it's using pre-existing, it's not doing any add-ons. We don't need to perfect the downward dog at a staff meeting. at a certain time, or have some cushions, or get a coffee machine. Those things are fine if that's what people would like. But actually, how do we go deeper? And deeper is developing connection. To do the connection piece of the work, we look at how do we create those bonds. We use staff meetings, we use performance management, we use CPD, we use daily interactions, and through those, we come up with a plan of how we're going to create deep connection by using connecting questions, beautiful check-ins where the person feels valued. We work on generative listening, generative attention, and what it means to belong. Till we come back to our vision and value piece of work as well. And so there's some of the sort of ideas of work that we engage in. And then wellbeing supervision. So for leaders in schools, I offer supervision for wellbeing and wellbeing alone. And that is a safe place, and is independent and is objective of anyone else in the school or the trust environment. And what I get is what we do is a chance for leaders to sit back and say, what do they find challenging, and what are they working on at the moment that they just need to offload on, or if they ask for, they can get some help with that as well. But it's just a safe place for them to offload, so to speak. And that release is very, very much needed. And we haven't done the research to show what that release will do. But if we know that frustration can last in the body for up to 6 hours, our leaders are being piled upon. There's no way of regulating your emotional system if your levels of frustration and anxiety are always high.
I love that. There's some very good strategies there, especially what you deliver in your speeches, what I've seen anyway, really good. So yeah, I'd say we can't expect teachers to be robots in a sense. I know there's been a massive rise of AI, and there's some talk of like, oh, AI can replace what a teacher can do, but that's just not the case, is it? Teachers have to, as we do, they're humans first, and they build those connections with the children. And if their own confidence and their own well-being isn't looked after at the start, then they can't impart their best work on the children at the end of the day, can they? So I'll just say, looking at the education sector as a whole, I know we talk about there's a lot of exclusions, suspensions, attendance problems at the moment. What do you think needs to be embedded then to support teachers at the start, to then transfer down into supporting exclusion, suspensions, and and boosting attendance again? How do you think that what you work on as well with the teachers, how can that transfer into boosting children's confidence as well, in terms of reducing exclusion, suspensions, you think?
Well, if I had the answer, I think I'd sell it. It's multi-layered in terms of its complexities. We've seen sort of we've seen sort of guidance and response to how we support exclusions and how we support inclusion as well, whether we believe in it or not. And it does come back to how we have got a golden thread, haven't we? A golden thread in career development for teachers. And what we have that's missing from there is, how do we support emotional resilience? What aspect, when we're asking our teachers very early in their career to do so much, to understand so much, and have behaviour management nailed, given the complexities of the environments that we're now serving, how do we create the emotional resilience to ourselves to not take some things personally? And how do we take emotional resilience to the point where our tolerance levels are exceptionally high? And we can only do that when we were working on our emotional well-being as part of that, to know that when we know we are sleep deprived, and that we have maybe some personal issues, and we have certain classes where behaviour management can be a little bit of a struggle, and is slightly complex. When you add all those different layers on, if we look at when we talk about knowing our children in their context, and we need to know our staff in our context in order to say we're going to intervene. So a piece of work that I do is called Teach Me How to Treat You. And that is a specific sort of activity for leaders and for teachers to engage in, to say, this is what is helpful for me in how I want to be treated at work. And it gives teachers and leaders the time to reflect on what is it that they need, so that we don't go away with limiting assumptions that we have on others. A lot of guilt is felt by leaders. A lot of guilt is felt by leaders to have dedicated time that they need to think strategically and to have some headspace. to be ordered to have their eyes up, rise and scanning on a constant basis, and they have to be on guilty, and they hold that guilt, take that guilt to mind. And then we have working mothers and working dads who also have that guilt because they're not able to work flexibly in a way that they would like in other sort of work environment organisations. And so we've got people carrying a lot of guilt around, haven't we? Nobody wants to exclude, nobody wants to suspend, and we people don't want to do that. But we found ourselves with 20,000 in 2022 under 6-year-olds, I think it is now, that have had been excluded. And so we need to think about sort of a different way of where do we raise our resilience, emotional resilience, and our tolerance levels. And how do we create a sense of belonging and an inclusion policy that makes people feel valued? You wouldn't need to be relying on it. So relational practice is at the core of all of this. You mentioned AI. We can't replace teachers, we can't replace it because our profession is relational in its essence. It's not about imparting knowledge. It's about relationship building in order for us to have an environment where the knowledge can be imparted, because it's then successful.
Yeah, 100%. I say
Someone says connect before you correct. I don't know who that is now, but it's a phrase coming back to me, a quote from somebody. I don't know who it is, so forgive me, but it's connect before you correct.
Right.
And it's so true. It is so very true. We all fundamentally know a teacher and can name a teacher who gave us fairness and was kind to us. But I don't know how many people can name a handful of teachers. It's often one. And so by law of averages, what we need to work on is actually all of the education system, all the sector within itself. And we are carrying. So I think it's at the moment for me, it's running on the goodwill. Education is running on the goodwill of those who are working above and beyond what is required of them in order to lift, to include, to look at their sort of exclusion, to give children a best and fair chance at the cost sometimes of themselves.
Yeah, 100%. All of that. I say we've got loads of subject specialist teachers here at EDClass, and we found that building those connections and building that trusted rapport with the children allows them to get more engaged, more enthused for their learning themselves. Just touching back on what I said about the aspect of guilt and how impactful that is. You mentioned Ruth Perry earlier on as well, and how massive that was at that stage. How do you think? Why is it so big? The guilt on teachers at the moment. Why is the pressure so much at the moment? And what do you think? Either the government needs to do, or teachers as a whole can come together to improve the situation?
Really good question. It comes down to the fact that we are probably the most scrutinised profession in the world. The teaching elsewhere is not as scrutinised as it is in the UK. And when you have a microscopic lens on education on a constant basis for every aspect of education, so we're holding more, we're having to do more and know more as a result of an inspection framework. We have got accountability measures that are high stakes, and high stakes are people's lives, their livelihoods, illnesses, serious illnesses, so on and so forth. So that's what we mean by high stakes accountability. Nobody wants to fail an Ofsted. Nobody wants to have a report hanging over them that doesn't showcase what they're trying to achieve. Rightly so, there are schools out there who can, and some do, fail children and staff. And so yes, there is a need to have an inspection framework, I would say, but an inspection framework that works with, not works against. And so a quote from Ofsted when I did my training: without fear and favour. And I don't know when we're going to move from a system that is so subjective to something that is so objective, but it's enabled rather than disabled. Until we do not move away from that, we're going to continue to see staff-related serious illnesses and mental health issues and worries. And yes, I've mentioned Ruth Perry, but I say this with great sadness. There are at least 6 coroner reports where Ofsted has been cited, according to the unions. So not just Ruth Perry, we are losing people. I had the highest head teacher vacancy rate in Leeds I've ever had before. Why is that? So we need a system of wraparound support. What we need to do is to give trust back to our schools, to say you're doing a great job. And if you're not doing a great job, this is how we're going to support you to stabilise. Not this is how we are going to scrutinize you further and hold you accountable. This is how we're going to support you, because we get it. It's a tough gig. In essence, it's a tough gig, and we know that. And until we restore faith, we're not going to change the system.
No, it's a massive tough gig. I couldn't imagine myself being a teacher, not gonna lie. But what you touched on there about having that wraparound approach, we preach that as well, having that pastoral wraparound for the children, but it's also important for habits for the teachers as well. So definitely concur with that. Just a few more questions then. I'm just saying, obviously you've been to the alternative provision conferences now, and what are your thoughts on alternative provision as a whole? You know, internal AP is becoming massive at the moment. You know, and how can AP in a sense build connections between teachers and children in a sense first, and then improve the whole school approach, you know, for well-being of staff and then children in a sense.
I think for me, the sort of AP competency where you're sharing expertise, and it's a way of finding out more information that doesn't make you feel like you're on your own. So when we do the activity at the start of the day, when they're doing conferences, we're asking, what do people need? What are you trying to find out about? What solutions do you need? What support do you need? And there is I suppose the sense of a oneness about it, which is what I'm talking about in terms of connection and belonging. Everyone's there to support provision. Everyone's there to uphold inclusion, in essence. And I suppose in a way it's dispelling the myths about AP and taking away the stereotypes that we have. And I know that when I was at Leeds, we can hold our heads up at the time, so there were 0 permanent exclusions for the city, because we used our area inclusion partnerships and our provision to strengthen the sense of belonging and to make sure that no school felt on their own. And that's what AP conferences do. It's a sharing reference, saying you're not on your own. What do you need to find? These are some system leaders who can support you and help you. And if we are looking at creating that strong sense of belonging, these are some of the seminars you can attend to understand how we have achieved that. So it's using the examples from the system itself, and I think it's really useful.
100%, yeah. I think what you're saying, having that collaborative approach, you know, and making sure that teachers understand that they're not on their own, in a sense, is fundamental. So, yeah, 100% agree with that. Just got one final question for you then. Obviously, EdTech, online learning, has become massive recently as well. What are your thoughts on it? You know, the EdTech space, and how beneficial can that be for teachers in a sense to help reduce workload? You know, but then also to help children boost their engagement as well. How beneficial do you think that can be?
I think we have to learn that we kind of need to move away from the 2D approach of student facing us and we're teaching, and that it's a monologue. What is a dialogue? And for me, it's about changing that aspect of, we have platforms out there that can be used in a way to engage more than it has been previously, but how does that work? So again, traditionally, we've got teachers in school teaching in classrooms. That's the essence of it. But then how do we use, for example, EdTech and other companies in order to provide more engagement and not have the teachers feel that they're on their own trying to teach when there's been a relationship breakdown, potentially, or that the child can't access that. So when we look at inclusion, we say, well, we need access arrangements. And what do access arrangements look like? We're going to really use inclusion at the core of that. And for some children who can't attend school for a variety of reasons, this is absolutely perfect. But what we're doing is we're trusting the system. So we need to know there's individuals who are delivering or using a platform to deliver education, that it aligns and it is the same, and that we can quality assure that. But yes, there are many, but a few that are of that quality. EdTech is one of them, of that quality that will mean that you can trust in the process itself to deliver an education to children who are finding it very, very hard to engage and reach within mainstream.
Yeah, I think that's why we've fought so hardly to get, you know, the accreditation with the DFE for us, you know, to give the teachers, schools, local authorities that confidence, you know, that you're getting top high quality provision for these students. That's the main thing, but it's also helping support school and teachers in unison. But yeah, Shaheen, it's been fantastic to have you on. It's also been fantastic to have met you. You've done so much for me for the conferences, so I can't thank you enough for that. Always been so reliable. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Where can people find more information about you and what you do?
Oh, absolutely. All social media channels, LinkedIn, Balanced That's the sort of website, and yeah, there's many different ways to reach, and I'd love to support. I'd love to support and have an opening conversation, and probably will ask you a connecting question, but that'd be great.
No worries, yeah. In terms of you say a connected question?
A connecting question.
Connecting question. Right, yeah.
So I'm going to ask you, Tom. I think let's just take Stephen Bartlett's inspiration here, and have the last guest leave a question for the following guest. What is your gift to the world?
My gift to the world. I'm not too bad at filming. Okay. Also writing, but also just trying to be a better person, you know, and impart just be as friendly as I can be, you know. I say a lot of people that come to me who say, you know, everyone you meet is, you know, people speak highly of you. So I think that's what I'm doing right, is, you know, just being as kind as I can be. In terms of work, yeah, I'd say writing, filming. I don't know if that's the answer to the question.
No, the question's obviously personal. The answer's personal to you, so absolutely. No, and you gave two there, so you covered both bases. You gave you and who you are, which is saying kindness, and connecting with people, which you like. And then you gave the work one as well. So yeah, that's a good answer.
No, you should get a podcast and I'll come on yours.
Absolutely.
All right, Shaheen. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Very welcome. Very welcome. Thanks, Tom.
So thank you to Shaheen for taking the time to give her thoughts. If you found this interesting and would like to know more about EDClass as a DFE accredited provider of online education for positive behaviour reinforcement, or for any of your students struggling with the mainstream, please contact us on 01909 568 338 or email mail@edclass.com. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify accounts for more upcoming webinars and podcasts.
EDClass Limited. Breaking barriers to learning.